Okay, hold up, because I just realized I don't know if I set up the audio correctly. Looks like it's working. Okay, and I also just screwed that up. There we go. Okay. Now I think we're good. Watching my playback here. Hey, Night Spearhead, good to see you. Okay. Things are working now. It is Friday, June 30th, 2023, and here we are in Fallout New Vegas. Specifically, we're here in the town of Primm, which is going to be the subject of the next lore video. It was originally going to be Point Pleasant, a remake of my Fallout 76 Point Pleasant video, but in exploring the town, I realized that I want to talk more about the Mothman cult, but I also want it to be its own video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore Point Pleasant and create a lore video on that and be like, hey, next week, Mothman video. But there's a lot of stuff I need to research still on the Mothman cult because, and I also need to do some dailies for the Mothman cult in Point Pleasant in order to access a couple more of the books that are available to people who've done the dailies. Books of Mothman cult lore. So, because I'm also going to have to explore things like Lucky Hole Mine and stuff like that in order to get the footage. And I've been to Lucky Hole Mine before, specifically to make a surveil video on the site before the Return of the Wastelanders. So, I don't know, maybe I probably should make a follow-up video to that as well. Anyway, though, here we are in Primm, as I said before. I've done the real-world research on this site. It is a small town. And this video will not be terribly long when I do make it, because Night Spearhead, you of course are in my Discord. I think you are at least, if I'm not misremembering things. But anyway, as I said in the Discord last night, because I was up at 2 a.m. researching this stuff, Primm has a history that goes back no more than to the 1920s. Yeah, you are. And so the area around Primm has been occupied by natives, for 10,000 years, whatever. But the actual, like, when the settlers started moving into the area and we get more of an actual recorded history, that stuff only dates back to the mid to late 19th century. And even then, Primm itself didn't exist. It was surrounded by small, now deserted mining towns, except for Good Springs. Good Springs still exists, but there's a little town called Roach, Nevada, which is just up the rail line from Primm in the real world. And there's a little tiny town called Ivanpah that's also a deserted ghost town now. Nipton is also still around, but Nipton is a very, very small town in the real world. Primm exists. It's actually a lot like this in the real world. It's not to say it's entirely like this. For example, the highway, I've been on this highway in real life. The highway is flat. The bridge over the highway goes above it. And in both cases, there's two bridges in Primm. One of them is a monorail bridge. The other one is a footbridge. The footbridge is at the north. The monorail bridge is at the south. And there's also just a typical road intersection, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go back over the map again just to be make sure I'm not like right off this. But there are only 3 casinos in Primm, and there have only been casinos in Primm since 1977, 1990, and 1994. Those 3 casinos are the Whiskey Pete, the Bison Steve. No, not the Bison Steve. The Buffalo Bill, and the Primm Valley Resorts, Casino Resorts, something like that. And actually. Which West Coast license? So, yeah, that 1920s on is basically the West Coast. I mean, obviously not. California has been around since the Civil War era, but anyway, what was I going to say? So yeah, Whiskey Pete, the casino that's named after Pete McIntyre, who was the original proprietor of the gas station here in Primm back in the 1920s. He was a bootlegger, brewed whiskey in the caves around Primm during Prohibition, so that he became known as Whiskey Pete, and that's why they built the casino named after him. Now, the town of Primm is called, it was originally called State Line, Nevada, up until 1996. That's when they changed the name to Primm, which was named after the Primm family, I believe. It could be an individual member of the Primm family, but the Primms operate the Primm Valley Resorts. And so it's kind of one of those weird situations where you have a town that is named not in like a memorial of a person, but like in named for the family that's currently operating the most stuff in the town. I feel like you don't see that much these days. Uh, let's see. Yeah, California had their gold mines, but yeah, before that it was mostly unrecorded history. Which is one of those things that's like, not to say that natives don't have their history, but the problem is we don't know most of it because most of it wasn't written down. There are oral traditions and stuff like that, but unless you're writing down your history, it's a lot harder to discern it and to talk about it. Now, if you come over here into town, the real town is just 3 casinos and it seems like a mall and an apartment complex. And the apartment complex was built back in the early 2000s, where it's basically set up for the workers in these 3 casinos. Now, in Fallout New Vegas, this little housing complex seems to be set up down here, probably for the workers of the casinos. In real life, it's on the north side of town. And it's, again, a desert oasis apartment complex. So, as far as I can tell, the Bison Steve is a replica, or not really a replica, but a in-game version of the Buffalo Bill Casino. Yeah, we don't do as much naming cities after people anymore. There is a roller coaster at the real Buffalo Bill Casino, and in fact, from what I've read back in '94 when the casino opened, it was the tallest roller coaster in the world. Now, it's not currently in operation, and from what I've seen, it's basically been shut down since the Great Recession, and then the entire casino itself shut down in 2020 with COVID. And so, while the casino has reopened as of December of last year, the roller coaster has not. But they do have plans to reopen it, and they have been running test runs on it constantly in order to make sure that the track's not falling apart, that the equipment all still is functional, and stuff like that. So again, in the real world, this is a steel roller coaster, not a wooden one. But again, it is a Buffalo Bill-themed casino, and we have the Bison Steve with the buffalo there on the sign. And both of them have a roller coaster, so that's how you know this is this. Oh, okay, so let's go over to the Vicky and Vance Casino, which, I mean, there is no real version of the Vicky and Vance. My guess is that this is supposed to be... I don't know if it was unsafe. Basically, I know that it's just not operational at the moment. And again, you never can trust exactly the people who are... Oh, yeah, there's... I can never turn that music off in there. That in there is copyrighted music, so I can't go in there. But if we take a look in there, there is the Vicky and Vance car, which is, of course, based on the real world Bonnie and Clyde car. And it's not, though. I mean, even in the Fallout universe, these the sheriff in there will basically say, "Oh no, you've heard of Bonnie and Clyde, but you've never heard of Vicky and Vance. They were just like them." But obviously not, and the way he talks about them is they're a much more boring version of the couple. So... I'll talk about that stuff more in the actual video when I can mute the music in the background that I cannot show you here. So, along with that, we got a couple of little houses off this way. One of them, of course, belonging to the sheriff who's been killed. I mean, so the story of Primm in Fallout seems to be the town probably had a steep decline in the aftermath of the nuclear war. I don't know if there was even anybody living here after the nuclear war for a time. There may well have been, but at the same time, you do have to keep in mind that if we open up the map, that we have the Mesquite Mountains crater right over here. So they probably kept this area fairly unsettled for a while. People did end up coming back, though, just as the rest of the Mojave has risen from the ashes slowly over time. Now, this is the interesting thing I don't know about this, is whether or not the Mojave Express was something before the war. Because it is interesting that they have these neon signs up, but there is actually a site in Fallout New Vegas that... or in Mojave, in New Vegas, that produces new neon signs. So it could well be that this is an entirely new site. Then again, it could also be that Mojave Express was also a local courier service before the war. So I don't know. I'll have to look into this a little bit more and see if there's any sort of real indication as to whether or not it existed. Sorted through the NCR. It may well have. I mean, you can even see here, this courier here even has an NCR bag on him. I want to look into it more before I make any pronouncements on it myself. Just because I'm not terribly familiar with the Mojave Express outside of the fact that they were your employer as the courier before you were shot and basically left for dead in the town of Good Springs. Oh, we got a magazine there. Of course, magazines in Fallout New Vegas aren't the same thing as magazines in Fallout 3. Okay, let's see, what else to talk about here? We got a separate faction of the powder gangers here. These escaped convicts are from the NCRCF, but they are not allied with any other faction of the powder gangers. And in fact, they're not even mentioned as powder gangers. They simply are known to have escaped from the same prison. Dark as hell in here. So yeah, this elevator, of course, can be repaired with your repair skill. First time I was... I remember the first time I came across that and found that you actually had a use for the repair skill in that way, and I was so happy about that. But yeah, this is, of course, where most of the escaped convicts were living for a time until the courier came along and took care of them, along with the non-help of Deputy Beagle. Okay, so what makes you think it was the NCRs and Lonesome Road, or whatever he was? Yeah, it is Lonesome Road. Makes it seem like Courier 6 worked closely with the NCR. I don't know, maybe. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. Is there any Fallout lore that makes extreme sense, but Bethesda says no, but the fans don't give a damn and consider it canon? I don't know. I don't know if there's anything like that, because I mean, the only stuff that Bethesda has said is not lore is Fallout Tactics, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and I mean the thing about that is I don't even think they've necessarily said that they're not canon. They've just simply said like that none of the stuff in there is ever potentially going to be canon. They're saying it's not canon, but they could basically take stuff from that and make it canon if they wanted to. But I don't know that anybody is really jonesing for the lore from those games to be made canon. Because, I mean, honestly, I would love to see things like Cheyenne Mountain make an appearance in a future Fallout game. And, you know, it'd be nice to be able to set that up however you want it to be. You know, not something that necessarily has been set by a previous game. Because, I mean, Cheyenne Mountain is one of those sites that we have not covered. And in the games that are considered lore that are like, it's one of the sites where you would really assume that there would be some government structure left in place. And my personal headcanon on that, and this is in no way related to any real lore, is that I would like to see an American government set up there that is not connected to the Enclave. Basically, you got like, I don't even know, I remember there's a terminal at the White Spring where it specifically lists the members of the cabinet, of the president's cabinet, that are not sent an early warning. And I feel like I remember the vice president being one of those people. I don't remember if that's the case or not. I'm just going off the top of my head here. But I would like to see some high-level government official not related to the Enclave have attempted to create, like, basically rebuild the United States as a part of the federal government that's not connected to the Enclave. So I don't know if we're going to ever see anything like that, but I feel like that'd be a pretty cool thing to see come out of Cheyenne Mountain. A lot of the fandom likes to think that one canceled Fallout game by Interplay is canon. That's Fallout Van Buren, which was originally supposed to be Fallout 3. And there's some stuff that they made canon from Fallout Van Buren here in Fallout New Vegas. Specifically, we're talking about... in Van Buren, they're supposed to talk about the fact that the new plague was made by the U.S. government, basically as a anti-population infection that was supposed to reduce the fertility of the Chinese population. And then some Chinese agents snuck into their lab in Denver and managed to release the new plague. Basically, they were being chased, and they ended up accidentally releasing it in Denver. And so there's actually something you can find within the Hoover Dam where these Chinese stealth suits that seem to be connected to that storyline. So whether or not that ends up being made canon overall, I don't know. But the new plague is definitely something that's been made canon over time. I mean, you can find information about it in Fallout 3 out in, what's it called? Point Lookout. So, the new plague's definitely a thing. The Chinese stealth armor is definitely a thing. The fact you can find the Chinese stealth armor here at the Hoover Dam may be made a canon version of that story. Originally, that was going to be told in Van Buren. Whether or not that ends up happening, we don't know. But I would say that a lot of people do consider that to be canon, whether or not it has officially been confirmed by Bethesda to be the case that the Chinese agents broke into the lab in Denver and released it. So, let's see. What else to talk about with Primm? I mean, I'm going to have to go through the quests to make sure I show basically all of the potential outcomes here. Because as the liberator of Primm, you get to choose your own sheriff. And so you've got... I hate these barriers with the invisible walls. You know what? I'm going to clip right through them. Take that. There we go. That's the other weird thing, is when you turn clipping off, sometimes your movement swaps. I don't know. Anyway, the directions swap in terms of the keys you press to go whichever direction. But what I was going to say, you can choose the sheriff. You can go with the former sheriff in the NCRCF, who was once the sheriff out west until he did the whole judge, jury, and executioner thing one too many times. And they ended up arresting him and sending him here. You can also set up the robot here to be the sheriff. You can also end up handing the town over to the NCR. NCR sheriff for the reputation bonus. Yeah, that's always a way to go as well. I generally, whenever I do this stuff, it's like, it depends on which way I'm going with the story. If I'm going to side with the NCR, you basically hand the town over to the NCR. If I'm going to be trying to set things up to be independent, then I go ahead and make the robot the sheriff, in the same way that you effectively use the yes man to turn the strip over to yourself. So, I mean, that's just my personal way of going about doing these things. What else to talk about here with Primm? Of course, Primm is the home of EDE.
Someone finally put down that sick motor runner son of a bitch. Good riddance.
Motor Runner, one of the fiends, I believe, if I remember correctly. Let's see, I've got another magazine here. Programmer's Digest. Yeah, I guess I've already... yeah, I definitely have EDE as one of my companions. Otherwise, you can find that robot right here, that iBot. Which, that iBot by itself is always an interesting little... Like, it's this tiny little thing that basically dramatically expands the lore of the Enclave. In the way that it's like, oh, yeah, he headed out through their outpost in Chicago on his way to Navarro. And it's like, okay, well, we knew about the Navarro outpost, but that added the fact that the Enclave had a Chicago outpost. You think we will ever see an official Fallout game that takes place in another nation other than the U.S.? It's hard to say, because so much of what makes the Fallout games is the retro future aesthetic of basically 1950s and the 2070s America. Now, I don't think that necessarily means we will never see one. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we did end up seeing something in, like, Canada, for example. Or, because especially when you consider that Canada was part of the United States by the end of, by the time of the Great War. And Mexico was basically, seems to have been a puppet state under the control of the Enclave as well, so... I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see something else in Mexico or Canada, but I don't know about overseas in one of your typical first-person RPG Fallout games. I would not suspect that would be something they would do. Something I've advocated for a while is something. Basically, I don't know the exact way I would have the game structured. If you would do it as like a tactics game, or if you would do it as some sort of like. Individual level adventure sort of a situation, but I wouldn't be. I've again advocated for a while for a game where you are a member or in control of a group of soldiers that were in China at the time of the Great War, and you have to find your way back home to America in the aftermath of the bombs. Just because, again, you can't do that in a typical first-person game, because we're talking about crossing thousands of miles to get home, and a lot of that's going to be on a ship or on a plane or in a balloon or something like that. But I think that would make an interesting game, especially the parts where you're basically just trying to escape China, get over to, I don't know, Korea or Japan, find your way across the ocean back to the U.S. Maybe even go up through Russia, and try to find a way across the Bering Strait, come back down through Alaska and Canada, see the like remains of the battlefields in Anchorage, the resentment against America and Canada and stuff like that. Try to find your way back to some isolated little piece of land in Montana or something like that. Yeah, either like a little strategy game or a tactics game or something like that. Some sort of adventure game where again you're talking about like discrete levels where it's like, okay, you're in the outskirts of Beijing. You got to find your way to get to this vehicle that'll take you out to the Chinese coast or something like that. So again, I think that would be an interesting game, but again, it would not fit in the typical mold of what we've seen in terms of these open world RPGs, because you would not be able to do the landscape that large, especially when your goal is to cross. It's not to be like, okay, I've got my base here in Shanghai. Let's get back to it. Do you think an official book could work on giving some canon lore? Does Fallout even... As far as I know, Fallout does not have books. I really like the Dead Space books. Dead Space Martyr is a great book. If you haven't read it, you should. I've heard that people lately are having trouble getting a hold of it. I don't know, something about the digital versions even are difficult to come across. I don't know how that could be the case unless there's been some sort of licensing issue. But regardless, Dead Space does have great books. I'm not always a fan of lore existing in books because, I mean, I like to experience the lore in the games. The Fallout Bible does not count as a book, and it's also not canonical. I mean, basically Bethesda has said they will choose things from the Fallout Bible that they want to make canonical, but don't consider the Fallout Bible itself to be canonical. Fallout Equestria, the real Fallout book. But yeah, I mean, like Elder Scrolls has books. I've read one of them. I did not get the second copy of that. That was the one about the floating island city powered by souls or something. I don't know. It's been so long since I read it. This is pre-Skyrim, if I remember correctly, that they released these books. So we're talking about over a decade since I've read that one. Resident Evil and Halo book series kind of crapped the lore. I've read one of the Halo books as well, at least. Halo, the one that covers Harvest, I believe. I've read that one. But again, in that case, we're again talking about over a decade since I've read those books. I don't remember them all that well. The funny thing is, it's been a few years now, at least a couple, since I've read Martyr, and I still remember that book very well. And I think it's just because the settings that they give you are crazy, and it's just, and also the twist at the end of it. It's a great book. I don't want to spoil it for anybody that is interested in the Dead Space series, but I'll just say that I've commented on this before, and when people have been asking about basically whether or not Scientology is supposed to be like an analog for the in-game Unitology universe, and what I've always said is that while Altman and Hubbard are both effectively worshipped by the members of their individual faiths, the relationship that they had with those faiths is incredibly different. Like, could not be further apart. So I'll just say that, and hopefully that doesn't spoil the book Martyr for anybody out there that's interested in learning more about Dead Space lore. I generally like the Dead Space universe, but I am one of those people that's a bit of a realist when it comes to like resources and stuff like that. And I've also watched the animated shorts on Dead Space, but I'll just say that like in Dead Space the whole thing is like, oh, it's 2500s and Earth is out of resources and we now have to destroy entire planets and harvest them in order to feed the human population on Earth. It's like, okay. That's a little bit unrealistic. When we're talking about the fact that all of Earth's supplies have effectively gotten us to the 2500s over the, all that time of human history, and then like we have to destroy entire planets, and that lasts us like, I don't know, a couple of years until you have to break up another planet. It's like there's no way in hell that that's the case. The amount of resources you get out of a planet are incredible. Like you would have to break up maybe a planet, and you'd be able to supply the entire human race for thousands of years. So, yeah, I mean, Dead Space isn't for everybody. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like the survival horror aspects may not be something you like, but I'd say that the lore of the world is really interesting in terms of the EarthGov, the Unitology, the sovereign colonies armed and their armed forces. And I know a lot of people also didn't like Dead Space 3, but for me, I thought the setting was incredible. It was like the Vietnam War set in space in on an ice world instead of in the jungle, in terms of like the way that the armed forces were just in the thick of it constantly, with just constant incursions all around them all the time, dealing with all that. um, I really liked the aesthetic of the ships, the fact that all the ships in orbit, they're all these ships in orbit you can still go to, and they're all derelicts, and they're filled with corpses, and they're named after these Arctic and Antarctic explorers. Yeah, humanity is expanded across the universe, but at the same time, like, I think a lot of people don't consider how long it takes for colonies to really build in number. I mean, so for example, think about it like this: the United States has our history. I mean, the history of the country. So, okay, you can have the fact that there are settlers that came up from the south, from Spanish America, to settle into the southwestern United States. But if we're talking about the history of the United States from where it was founded in the 13 British colonies, that stuff all started back in 1607. So we're talking over 400 years ago. By the time of the Revolution, I think and we're talking 1775, the United States population was somewhere around 3 million people. And we're talking about 170 years practically of humans settling across that area, traveling to the New World, dealing with the fact that they're in an inhospitable environment surrounded by natives that were either friendly or wanted to kill them. And okay, so if we're talking about spreading across the galaxy, and we're going to moons or planets distantly, we're not taking thousands of people there. So even by the 2500s, I wouldn't be surprised if 95% of the human population was still confined to Earth. Because just how large human population on Earth will be, probably around 9-10 billion by that point, compared to maybe a half a billion spread out across the rest of the planets. I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, we won't see, or we're very unlikely to see at this point in time. I've been a fan of the idea that we're basically in the last generation of humans that will die without it being their choice to die. I think we're right on the verge of 3D printed and lab grown organs, and the ability to basically print yourself a new copy of your body based on your DNA when it was 25, 30 years old, and move your consciousness over to a new body. I know I'm a little bit nutty with that thought process there, but I think that we're getting close to that. Let's see. Yeah, population difference east and west of the Mississippi is huge. I mean, if you basically take out the West Coast, everything east of the Mississippi is significantly more than the West. Yeah, unless we get instant warp travel, Earth population will definitely be stuck on Earth. I've always been in favor of the thought process that we as humans will find a way around the limitations of Newtonian physics. I don't know exactly what that's going to be, if that's going to be wormholes or finding a way to punch holes in reality and stuff like that. I don't know. But it's one of those things where it's like, you look back at what the original ships were, and we're talking like rafts. These things that could maybe cross rivers, and then you get up to the point where in the 15th century you get to the point where you finally have ships that can cross large oceans. I mean, we're talking about thousands of years of history to get between those two pieces of technology. I'd like to think that basically in the scheme of things in terms of spaceships, we're at like the raft stage when we compare that to ocean-going ships, to where by the time 200 years from now or whatever, we'll end up with ships that can cross the entire solar system in a matter of hours, something like that. So we'll see, though. It's gonna be a while before. I mean, the thing about space travel is we've got, originally it was just governments involved. Now that we've got corporations involved, it seems to be going a lot faster. SpaceX, Blue Origin, companies like that, doing a lot of great work. And we'll just have to see what happens once we have more and more humans in space. And I also like to point to the fact that So people have talked about the fact that asteroids, like there could be an asteroid out there that has more gold in it than humanity has harvested in our entire history. Same thing with things like platinum and other rare earth minerals. So when the Washington Monument was finished, it was capped with aluminum because aluminum was the most valuable metal in the world at the time because it was so hard to obtain and process into its finished state. And now everyone knows like aluminum's still not, the cheapest thing in the world. It's not as cheap as some other metals, but it's still nowhere near as expensive as something like silver or gold. Imagine what happens once we have platinum in the same availability as aluminum, or if we have palladium in the same availability as aluminum. Imagine the new creations they'll make with that thing. Nobody thought when they first started to purify aluminum, they didn't think, you know what, we're going to use these to build flying objects that'll carry thousands of humans across the country every day in a matter of hours. Nobody thought that kind of thing back when they first started making aluminum. So imagine what new uses we'll find for things like platinum, palladium, even gold that we just have never used it for before because it's been too valuable to make use of it in these other areas. So I'd like to think that at some point we're going to find something where it's like, oh, we didn't even know we could just do this one thing with this one metal, and turns out it gets us from here to Pluto in 6 minutes. I'd like to think that we're going to get to asteroid mining in our lifetimes. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so you're saying I know a lot of people crap on Dead Space 3, but that game confirmed that there actually is intelligent life in space, but sadly the marker brought its downfall. And yeah, people crap on Dead Space 3 because the gameplay was definitely significantly different. We're talking about going to wide open spaces in a snowy planet versus compared to these narrow corridors in space. But the lore in Dead Space 3 is definitely not where they had a problem. And yeah, the way they expand the lore of the markers and the Brethren moons and all that stuff is crazy with Dead Space. But yeah, so I'm very hopeful for the future of technology and human space flight and stuff like that. I've been very happy to see within the past 3 months how many more people are talking about nuclear power in a positive way. Obviously, the Fallout universe has an interesting relationship with nuclear power. Growing up, I was always a big fan of The Simpsons, and it's really just been kind of sad to see how nuclear power gets represented in media. Because, of course, when you get right down to it, it's just statistically speaking the safest, cleanest energy there is available to us out there in terms of getting a huge amount of power out of it as well. People don't realize that with like a postage stamp of land, this little tiny bit of land, you can get so much power if you build a nuclear power plant on it versus the vast number of acres that have to be covered in solar panels or have to build all of these enormous wind turbines off the coast to provide the same amount of power. And people have this weird concept too where they're like, oh yeah, once we get those turbines up, that's just free power. It's like, okay, those turbines are not cheap. They take enormous amounts of materials that also have to be dug up. And what happens at the end of their useful life is also not really well known either. I've seen these places where they've been trying to recycle those enormous wind turbines and they don't really have a good use for them yet. The same thing with, I saw there was an entire field of solar panels in Nebraska that was destroyed by a hailstorm last week. What do they do with those? I mean, so. You didn't like the Dead Space remake? Yeah, I mean, I personally, I didn't mind the changes they made with Dead Space 1. I thought that there were a few spots where they maybe went a little too far, but generally speaking, I liked that they fleshed out the lore a bit more to make it make more sense in the overall universe. Because it's one of those things where it's like they created Dead Space 1 and they were creating the lore at the same time. And so when they then expanded upon the lore with Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, they were and the books and the movies. In this way, they were kind of able to align Dead Space more with those and make them make a little bit more sense. I get liking the silent protagonist more, but at the same time, it also did make it a little bit more where he's able to, kind of talk about a little bit more. It's like, where in the first one where it's like, okay, Isaac, we need you to repair the entire ship by yourself, and he's just silently like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. But yeah, I did generally like how they fleshed out more of his relationship with Nicole, his relationship with his parents, to where his mother was a unitologist and all that. So, and that explains more of his hostile attitude towards unitology and stuff like that. So, but let's see, what else is there to talk about with this place? And again, unfortunately, we can't go into the Vicky and Vance because of the copyrighted music in there. Covered the roller coaster here, along with the Bison Steve Casino. Covered the little housing development there on that end of town. I mean, I feel like I've basically covered the real world lore in about 5 minutes. Where, again, it's just a small town with 3 casinos, a mall, and a apartment complex for the workers. Oh, a couple things I do know about their plans for the future, because, well, they've definitely had some rough times recently with the Great Recession and then the pandemic. They're, the website that the casino put together for the history of their community is actually pretty hopeful for the overall area. So it seems that what they're planning on doing is building a new airport down here in the Ivanpah Valley, because I guess Camp McCarran, which was McCarran International, which is now Harry Reid International Airport up in Vegas, is a really, really, really busy airport. So what they're planning on doing is they're going to build a new, or at least they're talking about building a new airport in the Ivanpah Valley. Now they're also talking about a high-speed rail line running from, what they said it was Victor Valley, California, all the way up to Vegas, passing through the airport. So it'll be interesting to see. I have actually not gotten to play the new Fallout 76 events. My recent time in Fallout 76 was investigating Point Pleasant. As I was saying earlier in the stream, I was originally planning on producing a remake of my Fallout 76 video on Point Pleasant first, and then following it up with the video on Primm. But when I was filming in Point Pleasant, I came across all those new, well, not really new, recently added bits of lore on the Mothman cult. And so what I'm going to do is cover Primm, then Point Pleasant, and then the next week I'm going to release a video covering the Mothman cult. So I've reordered the videos in that way. But that's where I've been spending my time in Fallout 76, is in Point Pleasant, investigating both Point Pleasant itself and the Mothman cult. But I have not gotten around to playing the new events yet. I am interested to see more on the Blue Ridge Caravan, so I will definitely look into that, and I will make any lore videos necessary on the increased information we have, on the new information we have. Okay, good. I'm glad you're looking forward to that. And yeah, the Blue Ridge Caravan is one of those, other than the Brother to Steel, is the first organization that we've gotten to look into that has come into the area from outside. Well, technically we can consider the Union, but the Union in Pittsburgh is like a dying organization, it really feels like. Blue Ridge Caravan's an interesting group, and from what I've heard, it does flesh out the lore more for, what is his name? Man. Got the house in Lewisburg. I cannot remember his name. Ares. I can't remember what his real... Calvin Van Horn? No. Something like that. Anyway. So yeah, if they have finally revealed... Yeah, if they have finally revealed that Calvin and Ares are the same person, then I'll make a follow-up video on that. Van Lowe. I knew there was a Van in there, and he's about rams with their horns, so that was popping into my head there. Calvin Van Lowe and Van Lowe Taxidermy. So yeah, if they've expanded the lore on that, then I will make a follow-up Blue Ridge Caravan lore video part 2. I've been hesitant to release a part 2 video on the responders because there's been so little lore added with the White Spring. It's like you've got Rucker now heading the Blue Ridge Caravan. I don't know anything about her, though. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like you get the most bare bones explanation of who this person is, Along with that, there's Orlando. We don't really know much about Orlando, but it seems like, if anything, Orlando's going to be in an Enclave Part 2 video, but we don't have any more information on the Enclave other than the fact that it seems like Modus is funding the operations of the responders within the White Spring. So, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if we get more information on the White Spring responders, and at some point in the future, I will feel more comfortable creating a Responders Part 2 lore video, but right now, if I were to make a Responders Part 2, it would be like 5 minutes long, if it would even be that long, because there's been so little added with the stuff that they've put in recently. Which is disappointing, because, you look at, like, the Brotherhood of Steel. I was able to make an hour-long video on the content they added for the Brotherhood of Steel. So, I don't know. We'll find out more. Yeah, I want to know more about Orlando. I want to know more about what Modus is up to, because I would not even be surprised in the slightest to find out that effectively the Responders Part 2 is just Enclave. Because, it's set up in the White Spring, being given funds and resources by the Enclave. I would not be even slightly surprised to find out that this is not a legitimate Responders operation, that all this is the Enclave astroturfing, basically trying to hide their past and use the Responders as a shield to make themselves seem like a beneficial organization in Appalachia, and basically do some good things like the Responders do, but really basically use it as a cover for doing the things that they want to be doing. And so I would not even be surprised to have the Enclave be like, okay, those fanatics up in the pit, that's kind of a dangerous situation. We need to get a hold on that. But why expend our own forces when we can use these volunteers and basically just throw them an ultrasight core every now and then and have them go do the fighting for us? That would not even slightly surprise me to find that would be the case. The Responders were technically part of the government. A lot of them were. They were part of the local governments, though. And, you can read about how the Enclave was looking at the Responders as a potential source of recruits, but didn't seem to go in that way. General short story version of Primm was a casino town before the bombs. Likely was abandoned for a time after the war. As Vegas has sprung up and started to grow again, and there's been traffic on the highway, it's turned back into a casino town again. Now, of course, you also have the NCRCF breakout and the convicts that have recently taken over the town, and so that's the TLDR version of what happened here in Primm. Now, of course, I'm going to be able to talk for Primm probably for about 8 to 10 minutes in terms of making the video. So yeah, I've been following my wife's schedule. She's working in the night shift as a nurse in a labor and delivery unit at the hospital. And so whenever I don't have to work the next day, which today I took the day off, so I was able to stay up, but that means I was working on this stuff at 2 a.m. I didn't actually go to bed until 8 a.m., so I was actually sleeping up until about 2 hours before I started making this stream here. So, but yeah, my goal is to finish the script on Primm tomorrow, probably. Try to get the recording done then, and see if I can't get this thing out on Monday. I don't know. I talked in my last stream about trying to come up with a specific day where I'm going to start releasing things. I don't know if Monday's going to be that day, but it very well could be. And like I talked about last time, I don't know what's going to be the most beneficial day to release these videos on. I'm going to look more into the analytics, but from what I've seen, it's just kind of a crapshoot. Like, it doesn't seem to matter what day, or even what time, really. I don't know what subjects are of the most interest to most people out there, because, like I said, Natick did 2.5 times as well as my video on the Boston Mayoral Shelter, but it also did, like 1.5 times as well on my video covering the factions of the pit. And it's one of those things where it's like the video on Natick, it was time consuming, but I probably spent 3 times as much time on my video on the factions of the pit, and that thing's gotten, again, half as many views as the video on Natick. So it's one of those things where I never know where to spend my time on this stuff. Oh, that's nice. I'm glad it's one of those things where you watch it when it come out. So again, I'll see when I want to make that specific day. This one will probably be a Monday release this week, but I'll figure out in the future what will probably be the day. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I have definitely increased my output on this stuff recently. Ever since my wife started working the night shift and I started staying up until 8 a.m., I've been able to get a lot more work done in those overnight hours. So I'm planning on getting this one out Monday, maybe the Point Pleasant video the following Monday, but I don't know exactly if that's going to be the case or not. We'll just have to see. Anyway, though, I think that's probably enough for today. I've covered most of Primm. We've talked a little bit more about some other things. So if you all have any more questions, we'll cover that stuff over the next few minutes, and then we'll close things out. Let's see. Yeah, they really did put a lot into the Union before the bombs. I'm glad that you enjoyed that, and I did too. I was surprised with the amount of information there was in the pit. Like I had explored it a few times, basically just to see what was going on there. I'd done the making of the surveil videos, and I'd found the lore there, but I'd never had taken the time to just sit down and put it all together. And there's actually a lot more information than I thought there was going to be. So I was impressed with that stuff. Anybody have any more comments or questions? I'll give it another 15 seconds here, and then we'll just close things out. All right. Well, then, it's been good to see you all, and I will see you all next week. And again, look for the Primm video by Monday. So this has been the Resolute Cartographer. Have a great weekend, y'all. And if I don't see you before then, have a great 4th of July for all you Americans out there.